a few more than that. All right. Um, I made them small squares. Now remember, if you want to change the size of your squares, you just go into your game square, and rather than it being 10 by 10, you go and put those into 20 by 20 or 25 by 25. And in fact, I'm going to go, let me just default these to certain values just so that if I want to, I can stay here. So I'm going to say value is 1,000. Board height is value is 1,200 pixels. This way I can quickly, without having to type the stuff in, I can have default values, which is called 800 pixels. And that will be helpful for me because I'm going to be doing something. All I really want to do here is I want for us to be able to change the board. Now we changed what the board looks like, right? But what we also want to be able to do, so I just click this, update game board. All right, that's reasonable, and I can change that. Is I want to be able to say, I want to change it. I want to say, right now if I click on this, it gives me my number. And I want to do it a little bit differently. I want it to, when I click on a board, I want it to save and color that item. Now I can do that with what's called a this, where it just says, basically if I go right now, for instance, so I'm going to come in here to our show square, and I'm going to say, I want because remember, we made each of these squares, they're a member of the class game square, but we also said that they each have an individual ID, which is called square plus whatever number they were in the array. And so we have an array that has, 1,000 items, and that means that if we go here, this is actually called, well, let's actually show that. So I'm going to say, rather than just show the alert square, I'm going to actually have it alert with its name, which is square plus whatever the number is, right? Because I send up, it creates 1,000 of these squares, and it has a number for each one, and then I send show square. I send that number up to show square, and I can reference it. So we're just say that alert square right there. So if I now do this again, update the game board, and get rid of that alert, it's going to share. That's square 215. Let me just get rid of that alert. That's alert share 215. What I want to do is I want to color that square. And again, I can do that pretty easily because I can just come in here and I say, this is going to be rather than alerting it, I'm going to create a variable called square ID. Square ID. I'm just making that up. I can call that Fraser ID if I want. Fraser ID. And I'm going to have that be asterisk square plus that, right? Because that's what that's called. When I create this ID, the way that we remember in style sheets, we say IDs are pound signs, not asterisk, pound signs, and then classes are periods. So Fraser ID square, and then all I want to do is I want to say, using my jQuery, I'm going to say Fraser ID, right? It's the same as writing this in here. And then I'm going to say CS. I'm just going to say background color equals red. All right? Very, very straightforward. But I'll tell you why there's a limitation to that moving forward. Because if we're trying to play a game. All right, but so I click here, red, red. All right, but this is where you start saying, oh, okay, I can see we're playing our world domination game, right? And I go over here, and then whoever's playing the other game is doing this. We haven't talked about two-player games, right? We're just doing this. But let's just say that rather than doing that, I need to save that information, right? I need that information stored and associated with player number one, and then I need that to go up to the web, and player number two needs to see that player number one just did that. So I just want to, we're not going to do the two-player piece right now because that's more complicated. I don't want to worry about that on day one. But let's just say I'm going to create a variable called my moves. All right, it's going to start off with nothing in it. And now what I want to do is that every time I click on something, I want to take it and add that to my moves. All right, so I'm going to say my moves is going to be plus equals, right? So I take my moves and add to my moves x. All right, and let's just see what happens. I'm going to alert every time I do that. And I think actually if I do that, it's just going to add it like over and over again. So let's separate it with a comma. All right. Now remember, I have to do that, the quotations. All right. So here we go. Update game board. All right. So now that's 129. Doesn't change the color, right? I took that out. But now I've got 129 and 185. Now I've got 129, 185, and 244. So all this is stored now in a variable. And what that means is that we can reference it. I can send that information to the server and have somebody else play it. But what, Mr. O'Leary, how are we going to change the color? Well, here's what we do. We're not going to recreate the board. What we're going to do is we are going to color the board dynamically. And I can do that inside of this function, or I could call another function. Let's just call another function called color the board. Function color the board. Whoops, wrong way. And all I'm going to do there is I'm going to look at that variable called my moves. Because I declared it as a global variable outside of any function, it's accessible. Now I modify it in here, but it's still accessible. So what I want to do is, what do I want to say? I want to say if any of these numbers are in that my moves variable, I want them to color red. So I have to get my variable here. I'm not going to create the squares, I'm going to color them. So I create that, and rather than this, I'm going to say square num available out there. Square num is not available out there, so I have to check that again. Okay, so square num, and I say, all right, I want if my moves index of, that's basically a way to check and see, does my moves have anything, whatever I put here in this parentheses, does my moves include it? If it does, then the answer will be whatever number, or wherever it is on the thing. Let's see if it's here. So right here, if I say, does it include 9? Well, then it's going to look here and say, you've got a 9 at number 3, you've got a 9 at number 8, and that's what number it is on this list, okay? What I like to do, because numbers are, you've got a lot of numbers, you're looking for a specific number. There are probably multiple ways to do this, but this is just what I do. When I add it, rather than adding it as itself, I add it as and this is a little bit weird. It's all right. I go like this. Let's look at it like this. I say, I call this the adjusted number, and I put a hyphen in front of it and a hyphen after it. And so now it's not just a number, but it's a number with those hyphens in front of it, right? And what that means is that I can look for it without thinking I'm going to get every 9 or every 3 or every 23 that's in the same number as 231. Might be a little confusing. Don't worry about it. There's lots of ways to do this, and this isn't necessarily the best. But what I then say is I take this adjusted number, and so I'm creating the adjusted, square ID, and I'm going to put there, right, I. So now what I'm looking for is the adjusted number. And when I say adjusted, it's really just that, it's been changed a little bit so that it's not just a number anymore. And if that is greater than or equal to 0, then that is going to be in this list. And if it's not, then it's not. And so what I want to do here is I want to say square ID, equals plus square I, right? That's the name of any individual square. And now I want to say, I want that square ID, CSS, background color, red, right? All right, so that's what we're doing. I'm going to find out how many squares we have. I'm running a for loop to that number of squares. I want to take it, adjust it, put the hyphens in front of it, and then I want to, this actually would come separate, secondly. In fact, let's just put that down here, just so we don't get confused. And then it's going to say, I want to look in my variable called myMoves. I want to take that adjusted ID and see if it is in that list. If it is, then I'm going to find out what the actual unique ID of that square is, and I'm going to change it to red. And what that means is now I've colored the board. Now what I do have to do here is I have to run that function called color the board. All right, so what we're doing here, the changes we made are we showed the square, we created this adjusted number. Remember here, this actually now I have to add the adjusted number. So we have the adjusted number, adds it to myMoves, then we color the board and see. So let's just see if that works. So my Chrome had stopped working for a second, and so I just switched over to Firefox, and I ran the file that we just did. And I will say this, it's very rare for me to do just right off the gate, even just a simple thing like that, a simple function like that, and have it work, and it did. I go in here now, I click, and this is saving the moves, and then it's coloring the board. It all happens very quickly, right? It runs through 4,000 items really quickly, but it colors the board, and now we can see things like that. Let's just rerun it, and you could see doing something where, all right, you go in and select 5, sections of the world, and those are going to be mine. And then we're going to do, I think on our next lesson, we'll just talk about switching from different players. But that works. And so what I want you to do is get your game board to a point where you can click on your game square and somebody could see, somebody can see that game, the piece is theirs. Now we haven't done where, we have to click on it again and it disappears. We're just going to say coloring it and do that. And that's your assignment. All right.